Welcome to Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery, a conversation held at the intersection of substance abuse, mental health, and everyday living. Your hosts, Mark Regala and Justin Wolf, bring both professional expertise and personal understanding to the table. So welcome to the conversation. Let's dive in.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. We are here with the fourth episode of Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. And I'm joined here tonight by my co-host, Mark Regala. My name is Justin Wolf. And so, Mark, great to see you again. How are you doing this evening?
Nice seeing you as well, Justin. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Appreciate you asking. I know we're here to really talk about a pretty serious topic here when we talk about what it's like to lose somebody that you love, care about, and know fully to this battle of the disease of addiction and mental illness. And so what are some of the things that, for you, Mark, kind of come up when we even just start venturing down that road, man?
I mean, honestly, when I start thinking about that, I start thinking about all the people that I knew that I have lost personally, from a relative, a cousin of mine, to a lot of friends that I knew through that world. And just, thinking about the conversations I had with them during addiction and while they were trying to heal and so forth, and, what ultimately led to their untimely passing.
Yeah. I mean, and I think you just kind of captured a key point there where it's like when we're talking about these people that we have lost to this disease and this battle, these aren't just statistics. These aren't just numbers. These are individuals who were fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, mentors, really, making an impact on other people's lives. And world was greater and better for having had them in this world with us here. And that's something you can go into a room and say, who's been impacted or lost somebody to this disease, to this battle. And the number of hands that just shoot up, whether you're in a small room or an auditorium, it's just staggering to look at just how many people have personally been in that same position, unfortunately. And so, yeah.
No, I mean, you kind of hit it right on the nose. I mean, when I talk to people, when I talk about my past and I talk about my story, it seems to me like everybody has a story. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that have dealt with losses in their circle, in their families. It's not something that they talk about openly, but it is something that they share with me once they hear a little bit about my story and that I'm living a life of recovery and I came out on the other side of my addictions.
Right. And I mean, we're here tonight joined by an individual, Kurt Scheitler, who also has fought those battles and is here today to kind of share a little bit about his story and as well talk about an individual or individuals that really have impacted him that he's unfortunately lost to this battle. So Kurt, welcome in today to join us here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Always. Wouldn't think of anybody else except you. So you are the man for this conversation. Because I think you bring a lot of wisdom and knowledge and just personal experience into the room here as we kind of dive into this topic. And so the audience can kind of get to know who you are. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your own personal story?
My story is probably, it's an average story. I started using when I was younger, been in and out of going, I've been going to treatment. Excuse me. I've gone to treatment 5, 6, 7 times in my life, and it wasn't until recently. Well, not recently. I mean, today I have 8 years, 9 months and 1 day clean.
Awesome.
But before then, it took a long time of going back and forth with going to treatment and making that real decision on, if I wanted to do something with my life opposed to just being a drug addict. So, I'm not young, you know what I mean? I'm 50, so. But it was funny, the opening of the conversation where you guys were talking about people who've been affected by, by drug, or you ask somebody, like, maybe they don't do drugs, but they're like, we have a family member. Like, I remember, like, back, like, 25, 30 years ago when I started using, like, nobody talked about it.
Right.
It was never a topic. And it was like everybody's, like, family secret. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no one would discuss it or anything. And now, in the last 10 years, it's like more people are like, oh, I've got a cousin or my neighbor, where, 20 years ago, like, it was like, no,
Right.
you don't speak of it, so it's
Mm-hmm.
insane, like, how just the disease of addiction and alcoholism has now come to the forefront,
Mm-hmm.
where 20 years ago, like, it wasn't a topic to talk about, or 25 years ago.
Right. No, I mean, you're talking about, hey, people are just getting much more open to discussing these very real events and these real tragedies that they go through and that they've experienced. I mean, you look at, you want to talk about like the war on drugs, and you look at these numbers of just overdose rates throughout these years, and that number continues to climb despite the awareness. And it's just screaming, hey, we have to do something different. We need to get vocal. We need to recover out loud in the way that things can occur and change can take place, because we have lost way too many people to this disease.
I
It's
mean,
like, if you look at the fact, like, okay, COVID, they called COVID a pandemic. And, like, yes, like, it's terrible. Like, you know what I mean? It was something that hit this nation hard. But now I do not know numbers, stats, or figures, but I assume that just as many people die a year from the disease of addiction as COVID did when it first hit. But it's like, because COVID is something that happened, like, nobody wants to go, addiction is a pandemic. They just want to go,
Mm-hmm.
okay, people out there need help. And, over the last couple of years, you know, the government has pulled funding for mental health, and, like,
Mm-hmm.
and for, addiction treatment, especially state funded,
Right.
so it always kind of blows me away, where it was like, we have COVID and we have the disease of addiction. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
let's, like, COVID's a bigger deal. And it's like, this is just my
Yeah.
opinion. Nobody else, it's like, COVID gets you sick like
Yeah.
flu, but addiction will kill you,
Mm-hmm.
or isolate you to the point where, you know,
Yeah.
and it just,
Yeah.
like, these are just my thoughts and feelings, not nothing else. So it just blows me away. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Where it's like, this
Yeah.
is a real thing, like, I often see people who, want help, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like, the state funded programs have waiting lists. And then if you don't have
Yeah.
insurance, if you have insurance, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's tough. It's
Right.
tough.
No, I mean, you're bringing up like, hey, what other disease do we treat this way? And I know, Mark, you'd like to kind of weigh in on this, because I think this just speaks
oh,
to you, man. So,
well, I mean, I was reading a stat online just a couple days ago, and maybe you can, verify this, because I mean, but it said drug overdoses are now the leading cause of death in Americans between the ages of 18 and 45.
Mhm.
And I believe that actually was a statistic from last year, and I believe it's going to repeat itself this year in 2023 as well. So you are seeing more and more families affected by this, and you are seeing more and more families talking about this, but there's also still a lot of families that are kind of living in shame, guilt, and hiding as well.
Right.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, no, because I know it's a lot of what Kurt was alluding to earlier. We're talking about, like, there's still a lot of stigma. There's still a lot of moralizing, judging, and just kind of like this perception that this person should just stop it. They can see the destruction they're doing if they just don't want it bad enough, right? It's like the old adage of, hey, they just got to hit bottom before change happens. And we're going to take a step back. And when that happens, and because I've seen this happen for a lot of people, it's like, hey, here were that individual's only supports, the only people that were in their corner that gave them a reason to kind of keep pushing. They're like, hey, at least I still got so-and-so in my corner. And the moment they go away, it's like, well, I've already given up on myself, and now this just gives me more of a justification to kind of throw it all in and go hard. And I think that's where I've seen that we don't go like with heart disease, right? Like saying, hey, they don't want to just take their medication that badly. I'm just gonna pull back. Never in a million years. Same thing with diabetes. They're not taking their insulin right. I'm not gonna. Like there's just a different approach as a culture and as a society that we take when we're talking about those who are impacted by this disease, which unfortunately the consequences of it.
I mean, there's a couple things I want to say in regards to that. One, I've always been of the belief of if there's a pulse, there's hope. There's a possibility for a turnaround and recovery. That's one. And two, and I think this is really important, when I hear somebody doesn't want it bad enough or they're not trying hard enough, it really, especially for somebody that doesn't understand what that individual is going through, it really irks me because I've always said this: nobody wants to recover and nobody wants to get better more than the addict themselves. They just don't know how to get out of the hell that they're in. That's basically what it comes down to.
Exactly. Like, and I think you hit it right on the head because, like, I know when I've been there, it's just like I just want this pain to stop. I'm just trying to find an escape route, and this seems to be my solution. But my solution is also the problem, and I just don't know where else to turn.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, we just happen to be in a fortunate position where we're still here today to be able to talk about this, and we're not one of the statistics, and so I think that's when we talk about just losing people to this disease. I mean, that's really something that when we think about it, when we talk about it, even like the expressing that, there's like a guttural reaction I have personally because this really just rocks myself, and I can only speak on myself here, like it just rocks me at my core. And I know, Kurt, you were willing and, brave here to kind of like step up and say, hey, I'm willing to talk about what that experience was like for me. So do you mind sharing, kind of getting into talking about who that individual was that really impacted you?
Can I use his name?
Go for it, sir.
So I know you guys had talked to him, on a prior podcast, Cormac, and I work in the field of drug and alcohol treatment. No, I am not a counselor, but I've worked in the field for the last 8 years. I've worked in housing. I'm a facilities manager now. So at one point in time, a few years ago, Cormac came through treatment here, and we just happened to be, I happened to be picking people up from our other location when we still had it, and he happened to see my T-shirt, and we listened to the same kind of music. He was really into Fish and the Grateful Dead, and it was funny. He saw my shirt one day. He's like, "Oh my God, you like him?" I was like, "Totally." You know what I mean? And I knew that because I worked there, I couldn't there's boundaries I have to follow. So it turns out though that because of the program he was in, he was going to outside meetings, and he became friends with the same core group of people in recovery that I was friends with at meetings. So then all of a sudden, like, I was seeing him in meetings, and then I was seeing him at concerts, and we actually became close. Like, we weren't like super, super close. Like, I didn't know, like, he told us about, I think he'd gone to treatment in Georgia where they gave them pets. Was that Georgia to the treatment? And he told me a little bit about that. Like, obviously newer in recovery, we don't like lay out like I had all this bad stuff happen to me. But Cormac was just someone like it's hard to explain because he was, how old was he? 20, 21, 22?
Too. He was young.
Yes.
Young.
And considering like I'm in my 40s and like me, myself, and the people that hung out with him were just like, there was just something special about him. You know what I mean? And people were drawn to him, and he was just like really, he was funny. He always had like just funny jokes to tell. Like he was telling us one day when he was living at Sober Living, like, it's kind of hard to talk to the ladies when I want to be like, hey, you want to come back to my place and hang out with me and my roommates? And, and then I just I remember, we were going to meetings and stuff, and things seemed like they were going well. And then one of my friends reached out to me, and I remember that day, and he's like, Cormac died this morning. And I was like, no, man, like, no way, like, no way. I'm like, come on. He was like, no, for real. And I was like, listen, man, I got to call you back.
Yeah.
And dude, I lost it.
Yeah.
Like, we have a clinical director here in outpatient. Like, I immediately like went to her office.
Yeah.
And just, you know what I mean? Just,
yeah. You really needed some support during that time because this was different.
and the worst part is it was happening during COVID.
Yeah.
So it was like there were all these unanswered questions because of like he was found in a park. You know what I mean? Like, how effing heartbreaking is that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No one knew what was going on. And, it's like I never wanted to like reach out to his mom because it's like, how do you be like, what happened? You know what I mean? Like, it's not my place. You know what I mean? And she did end up reaching out to like me and my friend Phil. And, we were invited to, the wake where, I met you for the first time.
Right.
But it was like, between being in recovery and working in this field, like, I've dealt with like a lot of death, and the ones that hit me the hardest are the ones that are like, like close relatives, like, like immediate family.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens to mother, brother, so you know what I mean? But like, I had never in my almost 9 years in recovery have been so affected than I had by like Cormac. Like, never. Like, I hear about people passing all the time, and in the fellowship I go to, there's the saying is like there's only 3 ways that this can end: jails, institutions, and death. And anytime I hear someone pass away who's been coming around long enough, it's like, but they knew. You know what I mean? They knew the reading, like they came around long enough, like, this is what happens. And like with Cormac, like, there's not a day that doesn't go by. Like, we go to concerts nowadays. It's like before the show starts, like, me and my friends get together and we'd always be like, who would love this?
Yeah.
Cormac would love this. Cormac would, you know what I mean?
And it's like his memory carries on. And it's
every time
still
I'm in
there.
the car listening to Fish, it's always like, you know what I mean? Like, it
just jumps out there.
It's like Cormac is there. You know what I mean? And it was like, just so young. And it was one of the hardest people I've ever had to deal with, passing in recovery.
No, and I think you kind of highlighted a lot of really what made that relationship with him really strong. And that bond and that connection. And it was just, that loss was different. And just looking at, hey, there's so much hope. There's so much charisma. There's so much uniqueness that this individual brought, right? Like, and I think that's the thing when we kind of look at people that we've lost, and just we can really kind of get down there where we kind of, what would the future have been with them in it, right? Like, what hopes, goals, and dreams did I have for that person? Those went away too. And that's crushing simultaneously. And that's what you hear families talk about, right? Like, my loved one, my kid, like my future, my dream, my hopes for who they would grow up and what they would become. Like, we see these glimpses, and then it's just taken away by this disease. Mark, what are you thinking over there right now, man?
Well, first of all, I've had the pleasure of speaking with this mom in a public forum about 1.5 years ago. And then obviously we interviewed his mom a couple weeks ago here on the podcast. He sounded like I told her, he sounds like an unbelievable human being, unbelievable young man, wise beyond his years. And I guess the biggest thing that I took from that was all the good work he was doing, all the help he was giving others. And when he spoke, people listened because he spoke in a language that most people, unless you were in it, couldn't understand. and he was able to connect with people. And that's what I took out of it. And he sounded like an amazing human being. And I'm really sorry to hear about his loss, even though I never met him.
Yeah. No, and I think that is the thing where it's like we see that greatness that these individuals bring with and that they carry inside. And I think that's one of the most challenging and times like most crushing ideas is that, hey, I see this that you have in you, and why can't you see what I see? Right? Because I think at the core and at the heart of all this, you just hear about that pain. Like, this isn't what I want to be doing. This isn't how I want to be showing up. This isn't the idea of what I dreamed I would be doing with my life at this time. And I know, Mark, in your story, you've kind of talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, with me, I mean, I have a personal story too. My cousin, had passed away from alcoholism in May of 2021. Okay, so it's coming up on 3 years here pretty soon. And, what's interesting is even though we talked about how families are talking about this, I mean, here I am, I'm her own cousin. My dad is her dad's brother. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think that my family knew all the struggles I went through. I was in recovery. Okay. I would still consider myself early stages of recovery. But at the same time, I had about a year and a half of sobriety. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that she was battling on the alcohol side. And I don't think she knew that I battled on the alcohol and drug side, the opiate side. And it was brought to my attention, that she wasn't doing too good. And one time I had spoken to her at her home, okay, on a bench outside of her home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got wind a couple weeks before she passed away that she was hospitalized. And I went there to the hospital, had probably about a 2.5 hour, 3 hour conversation with her. And I just laid it all on the table about everything I've been through, how many treatments I've been through. You can do this, you can do that. I'll walk with you. I'll do whatever you need me to do. And I think she was shocked to hear that. Okay, again, in the family, but nobody wants to talk about it. Unfortunately, I think that conversation happened a little too late. I think her liver had sustained too much damage at that point, and she had passed away 2 weeks to the day. Actually, it was just under 2 weeks. She passed away on a Saturday, 2 weeks after I had spoken to her of liver failure. And I was called to the hospital when she wasn't doing that good that morning. I was the second to last person to see her alive. Went to the services, and, there were some conversations that we had, and I want to be respectful of the conversation that we had that Sunday morning. But, there was a feeling of loneliness, isolation. She felt she was by herself. I think because people didn't quite understand what she was going through. And then you go to the services, a couple days, 3-4 days after she passes away. And I mean, the funeral home is packed, I mean, there's a long line to go past, her, the coffin. And it's like, sometimes I wonder, where were these people at? What could we have done differently, to prop her up and give her the support and the love that she needed to kind of get through this battle. And then I started thinking about myself. I mean, I was doing a little work with NAMI at this point, not a lot, okay, by any means, not a lot. And I really wasn't living a life of transparency. I mean, I really didn't, share my stuff on Facebook and, stuff like that, memes about recovery and things like that. And, she passed away, and I'm like, you know what? I just have to be transparent. People got to know my story. And if I could be a resource to them, if I can help them in any way, shape, or form, I need to do it. So I started to share some memes on Facebook. People started reading between the lines, and it just opened up my eyes because people started sending me messages on Messenger. Then I started a recovery page, on Facebook, started to get some likes on that, people from high school reaching out, former colleagues reaching out. And it really just opened up my whole spectrum as far as how big this disease actually is. And I got really active with NAMI. I helped support, help facilitate a couple of the support groups here. I do a lot of hospital speaking. I would like to do more. Unfortunately, my work schedule doesn't allow it. But I try to make an impact as much as I possibly can. And in my eyes and the way I feel it, I just don't want her death to be in vain, if that makes sense. I kind of feel like if she would have known and I was maybe more transparent earlier, maybe I could have kind of got her in the right direction. I don't know. I mean, that's something I'll never know. But at least I'm transparent now, and I'm helping as many people now. But I mean, it definitely had a profound impact as far as where I'm at today in my recovery, the volunteer work that I do, and just kind of my whole perception of this whole disease.
Yeah, man, I think you just hit like two key points there where there is that part of us that's always going to struggle when we lose somebody we really care about, where, what did I miss? What could I have done different? All right, we can kind of get stuck there. And I know, like, for myself, like, that's been a place like I tend to like gravitate towards, because it's just that, like, that natural instinct where it's like, now I'm feeling guilty and I'm making this about me, when this is some internal battles that we unfortunately, we didn't really know the gravity of just how strong those fights were that were going on, and just how much it took out of them each and every day to show up and to live and engage and participate in this world. And I think that's when you look at that strength. I mean, these individuals, I know, Kurt, Mark, like the people you talk about here, like, it's just like you see them fall down, you see them pick themselves back up, and we know just how much it takes out of us when it's like, all right, screwed up there, made that mistake, and now I'm going to pick myself up, clean myself up a little bit, and I'm going to move forward in a way that I can feel good about moving forward. And that takes a lot of like that work you were talking about, Mark, where this really propelled you to push forward in your recovery efforts here, to really connect with other people fighting this battle. And I think that's similar for you too, Kurt, in terms of what got you here to kind of fight this and kind of speak on it. Because I think that's the thing, when we look at these people that are really so core and we care so much about, what have you guys found to be really helpful in just the way that you're continuing to carry that message and carry their memory with you?
For me, to carry on Cormac's, for Cormac, me and Phil still talk to him, talk about him pretty often, and a lot of the music he likes, they still perform live. So it's like, pretty much anytime me and Phil will go to a concert together, Cormac's there, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, my cousin, she was one of five, so she's got four living siblings. When I see them, we talk about her. They actually have a Facebook page dedicated to her memory, and every now and then there'll be a post of a picture or a family function, whatever it might be. Obviously, she has kids. I don't see her kids that often, mainly on pictures on Facebook and stuff like that. But when I do, I mean, obviously, I think of her and see her. And again, I mean, I'll say it again. I mean, every time that I speak at a hospital, I do think about her. Because my last visit with her was in the hospital, and I feel like I said, if I could just pay it forward and try to help others, in her name, so her death is not in vain, it just kind of soothes my heart a little bit, dealing with that loss.
Yeah. No, and that's just so powerful. Just really that, hey, even though they're physically not here, we still carry them in our hearts. And they are really driving and influencing us in the ways that they were when they were alive. They just weren't aware of it. They just weren't so fully engrossed in just understanding just the impact they had on other people's lives in such a profound and powerful way. And I think that's where, when we talk about losing somebody so unexpectedly, like you look at the battles that are going on out there right now with fentanyl and the opioid crisis and the overdose rate, like it's just happening much more common and much more frequent than anybody would ever want that to be. Like, and now you have family members finding and having to Narcan their loved one. And so what suggestions, what feedback would you give to families who are finding themselves really caught up, hanging on, worrying about their loved one overdosing or finding their loved one?
I mean, from my perspective, One, love them because they love you. Okay. I think that disease of addiction does change the individual because of what it's doing to the brain, rewiring the brain and the brain chemistry and so forth. But that person that they loved is still there. It's still in them, right? They're just sick right now. That's the way you got to look at it. Don't get dejected, because as I said before, if there's a pulse, there's hope. And I remember one time I had a really bad night, and I came downstairs after I eventually passed out, and I remember my mom was actually scrubbing the kitchen floor, and she had tears coming down her face, and she kept saying, "I just don't want you to die. I just don't want you to die." I said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'm not going to die." But deep down inside, honestly, I had no idea how to get the hell out of it. I mean, there was just a desperation that was on her face. And I'll never forget that, for as long as I live. The pain that I caused them, it obviously I can't comprehend that. All I could do moving forward is, live a life of recovery, be the best version of me, and make him proud by living a life of service. That's what I try to do. But I mean, obviously love, obviously don't get dejected, as frustrating as it can be. Be supportive, okay? Words can be weapons, so you got to choose your words carefully, okay? Even if you get frustrated with the person, reward effort. I mean, if they're putting in an effort, there's some hiccups along the way. As long as they're making progress, I think that's a positive. Be encouraging. Certainly be proactive in the individual's recovery. Go to an open meeting, with your son or daughter or husband or wife or what have you. My dad, give him credit. My relationship with my father is not the best, but he would go to open meetings with me on Saturday morning, and he would hold me accountable. Come on, we're going to the meeting this morning. Come on, we're going to get up early and go Saturday morning. Just try to be proactive, because I mean, it takes an army. I mean, it really does. You have to have a lot of people in your corner to get propped back up, back on your feet, to be able to survive the disease of addiction and live that life of recovery.
Yeah, because you look at those symptoms that show up, right? You look at the behaviors. It's all the symptoms. And these symptoms, however, are the things that people can take very personal and make it about themselves.
Correct.
Because it hurts. It really hurts to believe that our loved one is doing this to us when they're caught up in their disease. Their disease is active and running wild and driving these behaviors. And so, just like any other disease, right? If I could look at it and say, hey, they're sick right now, like you said, Mark, how do I treat somebody who I know is afflicted with the disease? I support them. I try to help them get the care and treatment that's going to help them kind of reclaim their life, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, God forbid somebody passes away from a heart attack or passes away from cancer. And most likely, a lot of those instances, unless it's hereditary, it is lifestyle that drives that condition, right? But in some instances you do, but for the most part, you don't hear, well, he did it to himself, or she did it to herself, right, or she was a lifetime smoker and all that stuff, and, she got what was coming to her, or what have you. But with addiction, sometimes that's what you hear.
Right.
And I mean, truly, it's in the same category of disease. I mean, if we're not going to talk to somebody or talk openly about somebody who's got cancer, why would we treat somebody who's dealing with an addiction or a mental health diagnosis differently? I always said, if my cousin was diagnosed with cancer, or if I was diagnosed with cancer, everybody in the family would have found out about it right away.
Yep.
And everybody would have called, and everybody would have checked on me, and everybody probably would have dropped off meals and everything else. But because it was addiction, driven by an underlying mental health issue, everybody was afraid to talk about it.
Right.
So. Kurt, I don't know if you have anything to add into that.
It's tough, because I have people reach out to me here and there, like friends I went to school with who now have kids who are having problems. and they'll ask me like, what can I do? And it's hard because ultimately what it comes down to, which you don't really want to tell them, is I'm just going to be blunt here. Do you want them to die in your home, or do you want them to die outside of your home? You know what I mean? I don't tell my friends that, but what I tell them is like, the biggest issue we have is you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it. So you can send your kid to treatment all they want, but until they're ready to go, it's almost like you're kind of wasting money. And then, it's hard. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Because it's like, we see it all the time, Justin, where there are some people that want to be here. And then there are some people who are here who are like, my dad says when I get out of treatment, he's buying me a car. And it's like,
Yep.
that's the totally wrong approach, but like what Mark said, like, being open to listen to him, all as a person in recovery, the only thing I can provide is hope. To show like, hey, look at me, I'm doing okay. I have 9 years clean. You know what I mean? And it wasn't easy for me because I don't try to walk around like, hey, I got 9 years, I got it all figured out. Like I don't. I still, struggle with like anger sometimes. You know what I mean? It's like I don't have this down. That's why they call it practicing recovery. Just like doctors call it practicing medicine. They don't have it figured out, and neither do we. All I can do is just wake up and practice every day. If like I'm gonna be a condescending jerk at work and give you the eyes like I do half the time, like, you know what I mean? Where people are like, "What's wrong with you?" Like, I'm fine.
We don't got time for that on this episode, Kurt.
Yeah.
Don't try and make us go down that rabbit hole.
No, but it's hard when you talk to families because it's like you wish you had some magical thing to say, but really what it comes down to is that the person suffering from the disease has to make the decision, and you can't make them have that decision. Because I'm very careful when I talk to people, because I don't ever want someone to come back to me and be like, but Kurt, you said if they went to treatment, they'd be okay. I never, ever say that. I'll be like, you can send them to treatment, but they have to be willing to go. You know what I mean? So I'm never like, because I just never want anyone to come back on and say, but you said this would work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All I can really say to families and parents is like, you'll have good days and you'll have bad days. All you could do is just pray that they want to get recovery. And, if it leads to you having to love them from a distance and asking them to leave so you can have a safe home. My mom, the best sleep I ever got, Kurt, is when you were in jail, because I knew you were safe and I knew you got 3 meals a day. That was the best sleep I ever got in my life. And I get it, because when we're out running the streets, they don't want you there because they don't want you bringing drugs in your home, but they don't want to kick you out because they don't know where you're at. So it's like really so many variables when you're trying to like, you want to ease the mind of like family friends, but you also have to be like, there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
I'd be more than happy to take them to a meeting if they're willing to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
My thoughts are, and I agree completely, is, I mean, just try to get as many resources available to them as they possibly can.
Yeah.
They might reject every single one of the resources you bring to the table, but at least you're doing everything in your heart possible to try to help that individual. And you know what? All you're asking for is that one aha moment. Because that's what it took for me, was that one aha moment, and it was by providing all those resources. I just happened to be in the place where that one gentleman spoke, and it provided that hope and inspiration that I needed. Because really where it starts is with acceptance, and then hope and inspiration that it can be done. And then hopefully that catapults them to, living that life of recovery, or at least on that journey to possibly recovery. But if you just give up, and you're not providing those resources, you're not going to get that aha moment. You're not going to get that potential miracle.
Yeah.
So, and it's tough because I mean, it can be very dejecting. I understand that, but at the same time, I just don't think that we can give up on our loved ones or our friends or whoever, because like I said, as long as there's a pulse, I'm going to reiterate that, as long as there's a pulse, there's hope.
Yeah, no, and I love that because I believe I align with you so closely where it's like, hey, you don't know if this is going to be the time it takes. If this is going to be that moment that they hear what that message that they need to hear in that moment, or connect with that person that shows them, hey, you're actually a human being and I can appreciate you as another person and not feel like you're just dejected by society in that moment. And I think that's where I always like to tell families, hey, at the end of the day, what we have control over is what we do and how we choose to respond. And I want to make sure my side of the street's clean so I can say, I did everything within my power to put them in a position to give them all the possible resources. And so, does that make the pain any less? Absolutely not. There is no way to alleviate that pain of losing somebody who's in your family, who you watched grow, develop, the ups and downs, their battle, their triumphs, their struggles, and to see, hey, that fight that was in them, that gave them an extra 2 or 3 years because they could have thrown in that towel a hell of a lot earlier, but that fight was there. And sometimes we lose track of just how strong each and every one of these individuals are. And so I think you guys are did a fantastic job really kind of capturing it today. Really talk about just the pain and just that hurt. I mean, it just hurts when you lose somebody. Yeah, Mark.
No, I mean, it's not easy to talk about. It's very painful, but at the same time, I appreciate us having this public forum, okay, and be able to speak openly about it because, it's obviously my hope that, people hear this, okay, and maybe they learn from it, okay, and maybe they change their approach with their loved one, okay, and maybe that change in the approach, if they picked up something on this podcast today, leads them to that recovery that we're searching for. So I have no problem talking about difficult subject matter if it's going to help somebody, for sure.
And that's the goal, because sometimes, like, I know for myself, and I love what you were saying, because I think that even just allows me to even reflect on, hey, how do I respond, right? Like, what's my knee-jerk reaction? Because I know I'm naturally like a fix-it kind of person, where it's like, oh, this is a problem. I don't want this to be a problem for you anymore, so I'm going to try and tell you what you should do and how to do it here. And that's not good. That's not empowering. That's not somebody feeling seen and heard. That's just another person saying, oh, you made a mistake, which quickly gets flipped into, I'm a mistake. And that just pushes them further down that road away from that possible miracle that could happen. And so, no, I think you're right. I think these are things that we have to talk about, because when we're talking about, especially like Kurt, you brought up like your mom and you being in jail, and like that's the most restful sleep, but like we could hear that, right? And like that could cut us to our core. And so that's where for like our loved ones and like who are kind of there carrying on the memory of each of these individuals that they know and that they've loved and that are no longer with us, there's a big key there in saying, hey, how do I make sure I'm taking care of myself today? And that I'm showing up for me. And it doesn't mean that that doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean that I don't cry every day or on their birthday, think about them and have bad days and good days, because life is never going to be the same without that person a part of it. And I think that's really this challenge here is what, like you always say, Mark, what do I need today to have a good mental health day? And what do I need to continue in my recovery?
Correct. Every single day. And
so thank you, Kurt, for being here today, sharing again your wisdom, knowledge, and really shining a light on this really important topic to discuss and talk about, because it impacts so many people and we just got to talk about it. And so want to just make everybody aware that in our next podcast, we will be discussing one of the most difficult things in this world that we as people have to have: relationships with another person while managing and maintaining our recovery. And so again, thank you everybody for joining us here today in our Healing Minds Story of Resiliency and Recovery podcast. And we look forward to you joining us next time. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on Healing Minds Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. If you're on the journey to find guidance and insights, subscribe now wherever you find your podcasts. Healing Minds Stories of Resiliency and Recovery is an educational resource, not a substitute for medical or therapeutic advice. The opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of NAMI DuPage. Go to namidupage.org/podcast for links to past episodes, show notes, and to submit a question or topic ideas for a future episode. Until next time, be well.